anxiety to defeat the plague was purely scientific. How could he, a super-intellect, feel any sympathy for ordinary men and women? What did it matter if Earth died, as long as a new civilization would be built on a distant, safer world? A bell rang sharply through the ship. When Thordred flicked on a vision screen, Cort stared at it. The spaceship had landed in what seemed to be a park. Suddenly, he recognized it as Central Park in New York. About the ship, a cordon of police was keeping back a surging crowd. A small group of uniformed men huddled close to the hull, using an acetylene torch to burn through the metal. Thordred grinned. "Perhaps I could have landed in a less populated spot, but I'm impregnable, with the weapons at my command. One flash of a certain ray, and that crowd will be burned to cinders." "You don't intend to," Cort heard himself saying. "But I do. The sooner Earth learns my power, the better." Thordred turned and went to a control board. Stephen Cort stared at him. The emotions he had rigidly subdued all his were flooding up into that cold brain of his. But it was not cold now. Burning in Cort's mind was the face of Marion Barton, tender with humanity. He saw the face of old Sammy, brown and wrinkled. Sammy had sacrificed himself for an ideal in which Cort did not believe. He had not believed in it till now. Cort's heritage, the basic humanity in him, suddenly flooded through the artificial barriers of restraint. He had fought the plague to save men and women from horrible death, though he had not realized his true motive till now. Falsely, he had told himself that he was a scientific machine. He had almost hypnotized himself into believing it, but all along, Cort realized now, his motives had been those of common humanity. A super-mentality, perhaps, but first of all, he was a man. He would instinctively fight to protect those weaker than himself, even against insuperable odds. Cort's breath caught in his throat as he saw Thordred push a lever in the control board. With silent desperation, he hurled himself at the bearded giant. He was hurled back by a paralyzing shock. Thordred whirled, his mouth gaping. As Cort tensed himself for another leap, the giant halted him with a lifted hand. "You fool! You can't penetrate this force screen around my body. Stay where you are." Cort did not move, but his lean figure quivered with suppressed fury. "You have your science, Thordred, but so have I." "Your science!" Thordred bellowed. He thrust out a huge hand, gripped Cort. "Listen to me. I told you I learned more from you than your language. That was true. I drained your brain of all the knowledge it held. Your memory is mine now." Cort went sick as the import of the words struck home. His gaze went from Thordred's face, moved swiftly about the laboratory for some weapon. But the apparatus was utterly unfamiliar to him. Yet it had to be based on rigid scientific principles that would be the same in any universe. Cort's mind worked with frantic speed, trying to find some coherent pattern. Levers, buttons, wiring, transparent tubes, each one had its definite part. On one panel, several red lights were flashing on and off. Below each light, Cort recognized what must have been push-buttons. There were two possible answers. Either the switchboard had some connection with Thordred's death ray, of which he had spoken, or else it was part of an alarm system. It was probably an alarm system, since Thordred was busy at another instrument panel. The police outside the ship were trying to burn through a port, and the red light was flashing. The button beneath that light, Cort decided, probably opened the door. His face was immobile as he shrugged, deliberately letting his shoulders droop despairingly. Thordred's mouth twisted into a triumphant grin. He half turned from his prisoner, and his hand touched the lever again. And then Cort sprang. Not at Thordred. He leaped toward the panel where the red light glowed. His finger stabbed out and depressed the button. Chapter 14. The Plague Strikes. Thordred's roar came too late. A burst of sound welled into the ship. Men were shouting, and footsteps tramped loudly on the metal floor of the airlock. Cort sped to meet them. His hands lifted above his head, he was shouting warning. The skin of his back crawled with expectation of an attack. But Thordred did not pursue. Instead, there came a sizzling crackle from behind Cort. Strong hands caught him, and he found himself in the midst of a group of police. He turned. Across the door of the laboratory, a veil of wavering light flickered. Cort seized the arm of an officer to prevent him from moving toward the hazy glow. "Wait! That's dangerous!" "What do you mean? Who are you?" "Never mind that now. Shoot through that light, but don't go near it. You may be electrocuted." The leader of the group, a gray-haired, bulky man, stared. "I know you. You're Stephen Cort. I've seen your pictures in the paper. What is all this about, anyhow?" Cort swiftly noted the insignia of rank on the man's blue sleeve. "There's no time now, Sergeant. There's a killer beyond that light barrier. He's got to be stopped." "But we can't shoot down a man on your word." Cort sucked in his breath, then his hand went out in a blurring motion. Grabbing a heavy revolver from one of the officers, he whirled and pumped bullets at the barrier of fire. Flame crackled and snarled. The bullets could not penetrate the barrier. Half melted, they dropped to the floor. The revolver was wrested from his hand. The sergeant eyed him in amazement, holding the smoking gun. "I tell you—" Cort made a gesture of despair as he heard a low whine, rising in pitch and intensity, throbbing through the ship. He knew that Thordred was busy in the laboratory. He tried a new tack. "This ship may be blown up at any minute. Get your men out. Keep the crowd back." He hesitated, then pointed to the unconscious forms of the Chinese and the gargoyle-faced giant on their couches. "Get them out, too." Jan Saya, the Atlantean girl, was nowhere in sight, and there was not time to search for her. The menace of explosion the sergeant could understand. He issued swift orders. His men swarmed out of the ship, carrying the cataleptic men. Cort followed. He could not guess what Thordred would do now, but he suspected that the killer might loose his death rays on the mob. Orders ran from one officer to another. The crowd was pushed back, milling, asking questions, shuffling unwillingly. Standing at the sergeant's side, Cort bit his lip in indecision. What now? Thordred was impregnable behind his force screen. Without equipment, Cort could do nothing. With the right apparatus, he knew, he could find the vibration rate of the screen and neutralize it. But there was no equipment here. "This got anything to do with the plague?" the sergeant said. "We're evacuating New York, you know." "What? Evacuating New York?" "Yeah, the plague's hit us. The city's a death trap, with 8 million people here. Martial law's been declared, though, and everything's under control. The whole city's moving out before the plague spreads." Cort nodded, staring at the ship. "Well, clear the park, and get some planes to bomb our friend here. I don't know if explosives will harm him, but it's worth trying while there's still time. As for those 2 unconscious men you took out of the ship, get them to a hospital. We'll—" There was a sudden interruption. From the golden hull a ray of cold green brilliance probed. As it shot toward Cort, he felt a wave of icy chill. All the strength was abruptly drained from his body. He felt himself falling. The ray flamed brighter, turned to yellow, then to white. It splashed in pale radiance over the sergeant. His strong face seemed to melt, the flesh blackening incendiary horror over the bone structure. The officer dropped without a sound. Through filming eyes, Cort saw the golden spaceship rise from its resting place. It shot up and hovered. Fleeing abruptly into the western skies, it was gone. When the ray touched Cort, it had not been strong enough to kill, only to paralyze, but the sergeant was horribly dead. Cort felt himself slipping